So good morning, everyone. So I'm just going to wait a couple more minutes for other people to join, and then we can get started. Um, so feel free to send me some text messages or on the chat window, and I'll try and respond to your specific questions today. And before we start, I'll just give you an introduction to my background. So we'll start in about 2 or 3 minutes. Okay, so I guess we'll get started since it's nine o'clock now, and then as people join, we can take their questions. So, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining me today on this live stream. So, I thought I'd do this live stream. I think the last one I did was about 2 or 3 months ago, just to answer people's questions about the CARMS process and matching to a residency program in Canada. And since that live stream and some of the videos that I've had on my YouTube channel, I've had a lot of direct messages, emails, questions on my Instagram channel about just specific questions about people's scenarios. So rather than answer them individually, I thought it would be a good opportunity for me to get another live stream going and sort of openly answer those questions so that everyone is on the same page. So I hopefully this will be a very informative session, and I'll be able to address some specific questions and concerns about working as a physician in Canada, the CARMS process, some of the practice ready assessment routes that are available in Canada, and then just any other questions you may have about myself and my journey to come back to Canada as an IMG and work here. So just as an introduction to myself, I currently work in Toronto, Canada as an anesthesiology specialist. And for my journey, I essentially grew up in Canada. So I've lived in Canada since the age of 7, and I've pretty much studied all my primary and secondary and tertiary education in Canada. For me, I chose my undergraduate degree was in computer engineering. And I worked in computer engineering for about a year and a half. And then I really wasn't enjoying it. And medicine was always sort of in the back of my mind. So I decided to pursue my medical degree. And given that I did engineering, my options to do medicine in Canada were very limited because a lot of the medical schools wanted you to have a primary degree sort of in the sciences or in health sciences. So my options were either to try and get some of those courses in Canada and apply for medical school, or try and go overseas. So what I decided to do was I went to the University of Sydney in Australia to do my primary medical degree. And so once you leave Canada and go to another country to study medicine, you're essentially counted as an IMG. Although I'm a Canadian citizen, Since I did my primary medical degree in Australia, I was counted as an international medical graduate. And there are two sort of terminologies that are used in Canada. One is international medical graduate, which is essentially anyone who studied overseas in a overseas medical school and is trying to come back to Canada. So that's an IMG. And then there's another terminology they use called um, Canadian students studying abroad. So essentially, that means uh, those are like people like me, where I was a Canadian student. I've lived in Canada. I've pretty much grown up in Canada. I specifically went overseas or to another country to study medicine, and I'm trying to come back. So I'm an IMG, but at the same time, I have a little bit more of a connection to Canada because I've essentially grown up in Canada and done all my other education in Canada. So those are sort of the two terminologies you'll come across when you talk to people in Canada about medicine or you're applying to um, medical training in Canada. So for me, I did 4 years of medical school in at the University of Sydney, and then I had a few options. One of the options was to stay in Australia and pursue higher medical training, and the other option was just coming back to Canada. And my first sort of my primary goal was to try and come back to Canada because this is the country I sort of grew up in and my family's in Canada. Um, so it took me a little while. So I didn't after medical school, it took me about 2 years to match back into Canada. And in the 2 years that I was in Australia, I worked as a junior medical officer, just working in one of the hospitals in Sydney. And at that time, I was trying to get my resume sort of tailored for the CARMS process and trying to match back into a residency program in Canada. So essentially, that's my story in terms of matching back to Canada. If you have any other specific questions about myself, we can address that. So yeah, we'll jump to some questions that you guys may have about training in Canada, um, or any other questions you may have about the CARMS residency process, interviews, practice ready assessment. So feel free to ask me some questions, and then I'll try and address them for you guys. And hopefully my audio is coming in clear for you guys. Okay, so while we wait for some questions, um, so essentially, with the CARMS matching process, there's a few basic things that you need to have that I've been getting questions about. And the first thing is in terms of the LMCC exam. So that is the MCC QE1 and the NAC OSCE. So those two exams, you can write them as you don't need to be a Canadian citizen or permanent resident. You are allowed to write the MCC QE1 and NAC OSCE without being a citizen or permanent resident. So that's something that everyone can get out of the way if they want to come to Canada. Now, the second thing I've been getting questions about is the CARMS process. So, in order to be able to apply to CARMS, you need to have a Canadian citizenship or Canadian permanent residency. So that is just the basic sort of eligibility that you need to have. You do need to be a Canadian permanent resident or Canadian citizen. Um, and there's no way to go around that. That is set in stone. Now, how someone goes about getting Canadian citizenship or permanent residency before coming here to work, I'm not an expert at that just because I'm not an immigration consultant. So the best way to get those answers would be maybe talking to an immigration consultant in your home country, or maybe reaching out to someone in Canada about that. So I'll now go to some of the questions that are coming up and try to address them. So the first question is from Yamini Sharma. The question is, how difficult is it to match in Canada as an IMG? So this is a very good question. And I want to give everyone here a very realistic picture of how difficult it is to match into a residency program in Canada. So in Canada, essentially, the spots are very limited for the Canadian graduates as well as IMGs. And that's because the Canadian healthcare system is a publicly funded healthcare system all across the country. And it's the government who funds these training positions. So for Canadian graduates, there's much more spaces available for them to match into these spots. So, for example, family medicine in Canada, there may be about 600 or 700 spots for Canadian graduates. So that means people who have graduated from a Canadian medical school. Now, if you're an international medical graduate, there are separately allocated spots for international medical graduates. So in family medicine, for the Canadian graduates, there's about 700 spots. For the international medical graduates, there's a separate pool of about 150 spots, so much less. And that's just talking about family medicine. Now, other specialties, for example, in my specialty, anesthesiology, there is about 105 spots across the country for Canadian graduates, so Canadian medical school graduates. And when I matched, there was about 8 spots across the country for international medical graduates. So just by looking at those numbers, you can tell as an IMG, it is much more competitive to match into a training program because there's much less spots. And in general, you have people applying from every corner of the globe trying to match into 150 spots in family medicine or 8 spots in anesthesiology. So it's very competitive. The next thing is in terms of matching, there's this written rule or unspoken sort of thing where the Canadian students who've studied abroad tend to match more often into these IMG spots because they've lived in Canada, they speak English really well, they know the Canadian system, they know the cities that they're going to be applying in, so they sort of integrate much more effectively into these residency spots. So when you look at the match data, a lot of the people who end up matching into these international medical school graduate programs are actually Canadian citizens who've just went overseas for 4 or 5 years to study medicine and are coming back. And that, for example, is me, where I went overseas for 4 years or 5 years to study medicine, and I matched back into an international medical graduate spot, but I'm a Canadian citizen. I just went over there temporarily. So to answer your question, it is very competitive. It is doable because I do know some of my friends and colleagues who are full IMGs who've come to Canada only through the for residency and they've matched. So it is possible, but you just have to be realistic because it is very competitive. So you need to make your resume and your application stand out among the crowd. So hopefully that answers your question. The next question is from Olivia Chatterjee. And the question is, what's the procedure to do postgraduate in medicine in Canada for foreign medical student who is neither Canadian and does not have a PR? Okay, so for that question, to do your primary postgraduate medical qualification, so that, for example, to do family medicine, anesthesiology, general surgery, without being a Canadian citizen or permanent resident, it's impossible. You're not eligible to apply to the CARMS process to do that primary degree. Now, a lot of foreign medical graduates do come to Canada to work through a training program, and that's through doing a fellowship. So, for example, if you're from India, for example, maybe you do an anesthesiology training program in India and you finish that, then you can come to Canada, apply as a fellow, and you can come here and try and do 1 or 2 years of training in a subspecialty in anesthesia. For example, we have people in Toronto who are doing regional anesthesia fellowships or neuroanesthesia fellowships, and they come here for a period of 2 years to try and do some subspecialty. And some of those candidates end up getting eligibility to write the Royal College examinations in Canada, and then they sort of progress through the system where they may end up being able to stay here once they pass the Royal College examinations. So the next question again is from Yamini. So what can we do to increase our chances to match other than scoring well? Okay, so this is a good question again. So the first thing I would say is, like you already know, you need to score really well in the MCC QE1 examination. And the reason being is that's the only sort of objective, standardized examination that programs can compare you to other candidates from other parts of the world. So that is very important. The next thing you want to do to enhance your application is try and get some elective experience in Canada. So that's a little bit difficult now, especially because of the pandemic, where a lot of elective programs have been temporarily closed off. But that is probably the next best thing you want to do, is try and get elective experience in Canada or America, somewhere in North America, ideally in Canada. And then through those elective experiences, you want to get some good reference letters from Canadian physicians. And these Canadian physicians, ideally, you should try and get these physicians from some of the bigger hospitals that are associated with the medical school. So hospitals that are associated with the University of Toronto, University of Ottawa, McMaster, Queen's University. And these letters just look very, just hold a lot of weight to them, just because a lot of these physicians who are going to write the reference letters are also associated with the medical schools, and they may have titles of lecturer or associate professor. And so it just looks good on your application to have a reference letter from one of these physicians. And also, these physicians can compare your ability during the elective to other medical students or candidates who are doing electives as well. So they can compare your ability to other medical students in Canada and write a very good reference letter that way. So that's the second thing. The third thing I would recommend, which not a lot of people are able to do, so if you have it, is research experience and have a publication listed on your resume. So doing research is very hard, and getting a publication is difficult. So if you have a publication listed on your CV, then it sort of enhances your application, and it just shows that you've been able to commit to a research project and carry it all the way through to publication. So that's another big thing that would enhance your CV. So those are the three main things I would recommend. So the next question is from Fatima. What is the importance of our CV for applying license in Canada? I mean, do they only consider your QE1 or NAC OSCE exam, or other things as well? Yeah. So again, Fatima, my previous answer sort of addresses this. Your scores are important, but your CV is equally important, and that CV includes all your work experience, your research experience, as well as your Canadian elective experience. Other than your CV, your letters of recommendations are very important, and ideally you should get at least one of those letters of reference from a Canadian physician. So the next question is from Albertus Goody. Do you have any experience or knowledge about specialties, internal medicine, pediatric surgery, or OB, who are IMG, who pursue fellowship training as an IMG? Yeah, so there are, so like I said, if you want to do your primary sort of postgraduate medical qualification, which is doing your specialty, you need to be a Canadian citizen or permanent resident. And once you've sort of met that eligibility criteria, then getting into those spots is possible, but very competitive. So like I said, in anesthesia, 8 spots across the country, and you'd probably have about 1,000 people applying for those 8 spots. Other specialties are probably more competitive. I know like ophthalmology, for example, had 1 spot probably across the country for international medical graduates. General surgery as well. probably like I could count probably 5 across the country. So very competitive. But the other option is to do the training in your home country. So do your primary sort of specialty training in your home country and come here as a fellowship. I do know many fellows from overseas, India, um, South America, who are here in Toronto working as fellows in subspecialty areas such as surgery, radiology, anesthesia. So it is very possible. The way to go about getting into a fellowship, if you already have your primary sort of subspecialty qualification, is reaching out to the specific university programs. So if you go on Google and you look up, for example, say you're in anesthesia, look up University of Toronto Anesthesia Fellowships. It'll take you to the website for the Department of Anesthesia, and they should be um, pretty much a straightforward way to apply for a fellowship at the University of Toronto, for example. Yeah. So then Albertus is also following up with a question about after doing a fellowship, then they follow up with a CARMS application. So it is possible. So there are certain countries where the fellows come from overseas. For example, I know one of my good friends, he studied in Australia. He did all his training in Australia. He came over to Canada as a fellow, and he had his previous training, his medical school and his primary postgraduate training assessed in Canada. And after doing the fellowship, he was eligible to write the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Canada examination. So he wrote that exam, he cleared that exam, and then he's working as a consultant in Toronto. So that's the one way. If, for example, you're coming from a country where your training is not officially recognized in Canada. So, for example, there was one of my colleagues. He came from the Middle East, and his training in urology was not recognized. So, what he did was he did his fellowship in Ottawa, and then after he did his fellowship, during his fellowship, he got some research experience. He got some Canadian reference letters. And then he made his resume stand out. And then because he was not eligible to write the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Canada examination, he applied through CARMS and redid his primary training. Although he was a specialist in urology, just because he wasn't recognized as one in Canada, he went through the CARMS process, matched because he had a really good application, and then did his 5 years of urology residency training again. And now he's working in Toronto as well. So it was a bit of a longer process for him, but he was committed to working in Canada. So he went through that route, and he pretty much achieved his goals. So the next question is from Edge. How can we get Canadian clinical experience as people who've already graduated from medical school outside of electives, since you aren't students anymore? So that's a good question. So electives specifically are only open to people who are in medical school. Okay. The other way to get clinical experience is, rather than doing what's called an elective, you can do an observership. So an observership is not as powerful as an elective because you're technically not allowed to have any direct patient contact. You're sort of sitting in the sidelines and just observing how physicians go about their day-to-day routine in Canada. The observership is probably the only other way you can get sort of experience in a clinical environment if you're not a medical student. So observerships are available through most hospitals in Toronto, most hospitals in Canada. You just have to reach out to the various departments and ask them that you want to do an observership. Usually there's a small fee for just the administrative sort of process through it, but then that's a good way to sort of get clinical experience. And then when you start your observership, you should sort of talk to your supervisor and tell them your intention is to apply to CARMS and you want to try and get a good reference letter. So see if you can make that clear with them, and then they should be able to give you a reference letter based on your observership. Okay, so the next question is from Laura. She asks, how does assessment verification period work after you match? So the assessment verification period essentially is, I can compare it to being on probation after you get a new job. So in most jobs in Canada, at least, when you first get a job, you're placed on probation. This means there's a period of time where they are eligible, or without any consequence, they can let you go, saying that you're not a right fit for the program or you're not a right fit for the job. So the assessment verification period is usually about 3 months. At least when I did residency, it was about 3 months. And essentially it's a time where, they meet, your program director meets with you every 2 or 3 weeks and sort of assesses how you're doing, is able to answer some of your questions. And essentially the assessment verification period, I would say, if you've matched into residency, the assessment verification period is just a formality. You'll get through it. It's not really a problem as long as you have, good patient interaction skills and you're not doing anything overtly wrong with patients or your colleagues. Usually everyone gets through it. It's just a 3 month period, like a probation period. Yeah, and it's no different. You don't have any other tasks assigned to compared to the other residents. It's just a probation period, but usually everyone gets through it. So the next question is from Uloma. Do you have to use Toronto notes to pass the QE1? Can you use Step 2 CK resources as your primary study material? So I would say I would not use Toronto notes for all of my MCC QE1 studying. So I have a video on my YouTube channel specifically about the MCC QE1 examination. So I would quickly have a look through that just to review the advice I give on that video. But specifically, when I studied for the QE1, the main resource I used was my medical school notes, because those were the notes that I was most familiar with, and I knew exactly where all the information was. So that's your number one resource. The next resource I would use is either the Canada Q Bank or UWorld, so the UWorld questions. When I studied, this was about 10 years ago, I used the Canada Q Bank because at that time, the Canada Q Bank reflected very closely with the actual MCC QE1 examination. I know now from talking to people, they're saying that the UWorld question bank may be more relevant than the Canada Q Bank. So try and maybe use one or the other, either the Canada Q Bank or UWorld. And then for the Toronto notes, the only thing I would specifically study from the Toronto notes is the community medicine section, because that has some information specifically about Canadian sort of practice. And then there's also a section with population health, which I would recommend studying from Toronto Notes. So those are the only two chapters I would really recommend studying from Toronto Notes. Everything else, I would use Toronto Notes as a reference, but I would not use that as your primary resource to study with. So the next question again is from Laura about how can a IMG have a rotation or elective in Canada. So if you finished medical school, the only way you can sort of get clinical experience, Laura, would be through doing an observership in Canada. So I would reach out to the specific medical schools and ask them if you could do an observership in a specific specialty that you want to. Again, it's not as powerful as doing an elective because as an observer, you don't have direct patient contact, but you may be able to get a reference letter through that. The next question is from Huma. I wasn't able to do electives in Canada due to the pandemic. What would help more now? Working as a physician assistant doing observerships or working as a research associate? Um, in my opinion, I think working as a research associate may have more of an impact on your application. And it's very specific. If this research associate position is going to be able to get you research experience, potentially if you're able to publish a few journal articles through that position, this could be highly beneficial for your CV, because having research experience and having a publication on your resume looks really good. And then the other thing is you may be able to get a good reference letter from, because most of the research or clinical research that's done in these universities are done by physicians who are also practicing clinicians, right? So by doing this research associate position, you may be able to get a publication. You're going to start working with physicians who are also doing research, and you may be able to get a reference letter from them. And once you get to know some of these physicians, they're willing to go above and beyond to help you out. So they would be able to write a good reference letter saying that they've observed you in the research environment and you would be a good candidate as a resident for this program or that program. So rather than working as a physician assistant, I would probably recommend doing a research associate role, because there's, at the end, you're going to get more out of it. And that's my personal opinion. So the next question is from Marshima. Do I need to reboard an anesthesiologist program if I graduated from an anesthesia program in another country and want permanent residency too? So that question is, I would really need more specifics about it. So there are certain countries where if you've had your primary anesthesia training from, you're able to come to Canada and sit for, do a fellowship, and you're eligible to write the Royal College examinations. So everyone who works in Canada as a Canadian specialist has to write the the Royal College of Physicians of Surgeons of Canada examination. So you may be able to come here and just write that exam, pass the exam, and start working as a consultant. And then you may be able to get through to getting permanent residency that way. But it really depends on which country you're coming from. There are certain countries in the Middle East or some other parts of the country where your primary anesthesia training is not recognized, so you may have to do residency again. So the next question is from Navjot. Is it easier for an Indian IMG to get licensed in Canada after doing MD postgraduate in India as compared to applying after MBBS in India? So I would assume your background is you've studied all of your training in India, and you're not a Canadian studying abroad in India. So I think it's a very difficult question, but matching into CARMS in a specialty is very difficult. So it's a very hard question. It really depends on some specifics in terms of what your sort of previous education is. You may be able to come from India, do a fellowship in Canada, and then sit the Royal College examinations, or you may be able to do practice ready assessment and then get a license that way. But it's a very unique question that has a lot of specific sort of factors involved. So I won't be able to give you a general answer, but both routes I would say are quite competitive. You need to really work hard to get through those routes. But I don't know which would be easier, to be honest. So the next question is from Alvin. If I got a match to a residency program, do I get to choose where I would like to do my residency in Canada, or is it randomization? So Alvin, when you apply for a residency program in Canada, you're going to be applying specifically to various programs around the country. So if you apply for a residency program at the University of Toronto, you'll be based in Toronto. If you apply for residency program at the University of Alberta, and you get into that residency program, you'll be based in Alberta. So you don't get to pick where you do your residency if you match. But if you want to live in Toronto, then you essentially just apply for the residency programs at the University of Toronto. It's like essentially like applying for a job. If you want to work in Toronto, you apply for the jobs in Toronto. So the next question is from Dr. Sheikh. I'm from India and doing MRCOG. Is it helpful to migrate to Canada? So the MRCOG is specifically for the UK, and essentially it's not the fellowship in obstetrics and gynecology, but it's one of the certificates that you get in order to become a specialist in obstetrics and gynecology in the UK. Unfortunately, although we're a Commonwealth country, that qualification doesn't directly allow you to migrate to Canada. It may make your resume look a bit better because you have an extra, certificate, but it doesn't directly impact your ability to come to Canada. The next question is from Edge. How do we go about applying for research positions? Do you know any websites we could look through for these? Sorry, I'm an incoming Canadian permanent resident. So to be honest, for research positions, the best way to get into that is to do a postgraduate degree. And so my recommendation to get into a research position is to do something like a master's degree in some sort of subject that you're interested in. That would be the best way to get a research position. I'm not certain whether these if you do a master's, you get paid. You might get a stipend for some of the work you do, but it's not a full-time job. In order to get a research position, ideally, you're going to have a master's or PhD in a specialty. And those are quite competitive to get. So my best advice is, I know it's sometimes not practical going back to school to do a master's, but if you want to do research to get your resume padded up with publications, would be to do a master's degree. The next question is from Azad. I'm a final year medical student. I always doubt whether to do my internship in my home country or migrate to Canada right after my MBBS degree. I would appreciate your input. So again, this is a very hard question, and it's a very personal decision. If you migrate to Canada directly after your MBBS, then essentially what you're going to be doing is you'll eventually have to apply to CARMS to do further medical training in Canada. And again, like I said, it's very competitive. So for example, if you want to do family medicine, there's going to be about 150 spots across the country. And I would say probably about 2,000 or 3,000 people are applying for those 150 spots. And looking at the statistics in the past, a lot of the people who end up matching to those spots are Canadian, Canadian citizens who've lived in Canada for many years, who went overseas just for a period of 4 years to study medicine, are coming back. So the majority of that 150 spots goes to Canadian citizens who've been here for a long time. So it's a very difficult decision because I know it is possible to match into some of these training spots coming from India, but it's very competitive, and some people never end up matching, and they may end up having to do other jobs, which is which is fine. A lot of people are successful doing other jobs, but they're not physicians. So other options that people get into are one is nursing, being a physician assistant, being a radiation therapist. So there are other sort of allied jobs that people can do with if they're not able to successfully match through the CARMS process. It's a very personal decision, and it's really, you need to look into whether living in Canada is more important or whether you want to pursue medicine, and you may need to stay in India to do that. So again, it's not an easy question for me to answer, but if you shoot me an email, we can talk a bit more about it. Again, it's very specific to different scenarios. So the next question is from Sebastian. If I am planning to work in Quebec, should I do the QE1 and NAC in French or English? I would say if you're planning to work in Quebec, I would assume that you have good knowledge of French. I would essentially, to do these exams, I would basically do them in the language that you're most comfortable with, because the most important thing is to score well, especially the QE1. You want to get a good score, so I would do the exam in the language that you're most comfortable in, and then apply to Quebec. So the next question again is from Edge. How viable of an option is training in the US with the aim of practicing in Canada afterwards? Thinking of doing my family medicine residency in the US if I can't match in Canada after some time. I think that's a very good option. So I know a lot of physicians in Canada who are working now in Canada whose residency training is from the United States. So that's another very good option. So if you're not able to match in Canada, the next option is the United States. So the reason why a lot of people end up going to the United States is, one, the population in the United States is almost 10 times more than Canada. So Canada has a population of about 37 million. The United States has 350 million. So the number of spots for residency positions are far more in the United States. And the United States has a lot more positions available for international medical graduates. So matching in the United States for family medicine or any other specialty is much easier. And then coming over, once you've done your residency in the United States, it's much easier because Canada recognizes a United States training. So, for example, I have a few friends who've done their family medicine residency in New York State, and then have literally just come across the border and they're working in Canada. They may need to just get approval from the college that grants licenses in Ontario, but it's a relatively straightforward process. The next question is from Suhas Reddy. This question is, does the pay of different specialties vary grossly, or is it similar? I'm planning for pathology residency. So when you're doing residency training, the pay is standard across all specialties, but each province has different pay scales. So in Ontario, for example, as a resident, in your first year of residency, the pay is about $56,000 a year. And then each year, each subsequent year, second year, all the way up to third year, your pay probably increases by about $6,000 per year. So as a fifth year resident in any specialty, your pay is close to about $82,000, I believe, in Ontario. And it's very similar across the provinces. It may vary about $1,000 or $2,000 per year. So that's in residency. Once you finish residency and you're practicing as a consultant, then the pay does vary quite broadly among different specialties. So I would say the specialties in Canada that pay really well are the ones that are procedural. So these include specialties such as a few of the surgical specialties, for example, neurosurgery, orthopedics. Um, these specialties pay fairly well among the surgical specialties. And then some of the other non-surgical procedural specialties also pay really well. So specialties such as anesthesiology, interventional radiology, um, what other specialties? Interventional radiology, some of the dermatology specialties, ophthalmology, they pay really well. But, at the end of the day, the biggest factor in applying for a specialty should be your interest in the specialty, because physicians, whether you're at the high end of the pay scale or at the low end of this pay scale, you're still making a very good salary in Canada as a specialist in any field. So the number one thing I would recommend is do a specialty that you really enjoy, because work is going to be easy for you. You're not going to feel like it's a chore to go to work. So that's the number one thing. But there's a bit of a range. So at the highest end, for example, in Ontario, probably the high end specialists are making maybe about 1.2 million a year. At the lower end, I would say some specialties are probably making about 250 to 300,000 a year. The other thing about salaries in Ontario and probably across Canada is you work as an independent consultant to the hospital. So the hospital specifically don't pay you. The way you get paid is you work as a consultant for the hospital, and any patient that you see or any procedure that you do on a patient, you take the patient's health card number and you bill directly to the government for a specific procedure. And essentially, there's a billing schedule that is sent out by the Ministry of Health that tells you for a consultation, it's this fee, or for this procedure, it's this fee. So if you do a specific procedure or consultation, you bill directly to the government and they pay you directly as a consultant to the hospital. So most physicians in Canada work as a consultant, and they are essentially self-employed, and basically provide a service to the hospital. So no one is paid directly by a hospital in Canada. The next question is from Humas. This is about follow-up question. I have a few publications, but not in high index journals. Is it still better to work as a research associate, or is getting clinical experience better? I think it's difficult. If you already have some publications that are recent within the last 5 years, then I think adding a few more publications probably won't impact your application any further, because you already have those publications. If you already have publications, it doesn't matter what journal it's in, even if it's not a high impact factor journal. Like, everyone can't publish in the New England Journal or Nature. But, one of my publications was in the British Journal of Anesthesia, which is, medium impact journal. The next thing I would do is try to get clinical experience. And the main thing with the clinical experience is you want to try and get a good reference letter from a Canadian physician. So if you already have research experience, then maybe try to get clinical experience and get a reference letter that way. But you may be able to get a reference letter as a research associate as well. So both are good options. I think it's just a matter of your choice. So the next question is from Marshima. I'm from Thailand. I think my institute is eligible in Canada. I will check again. Thanks anyways. Okay, that's good. The next question is from Arsalan. What's a good score in the MCC QE1 to match into something like internal medicine? There's no official score. Essentially, the official the official guide is you need to pass the MCC QE1. And the thing about the MCC QE1 is once you pass the exam, that's it. You can't rewrite the exam. You basically, that score is what you keep. And it's unfortunate because some people just have a bad day and they may want to try and upgrade their score. But once you pass the exam, that's it. That's the score you keep. Now, there's no official score that's going to guarantee you a spot in a residency program. The residency applications are based on many factors. One is the score, the other is your resume, the other is how you come across in the interview, your research experience. So there's no official score. I would recommend to try and get the highest score you can possibly get in the first time around, so that you don't need to worry, right? If you've achieved the highest score you possibly can get, then you don't really need to worry and you can't really go back and think about doing anything differently. So for example, when I applied to my anesthesia residency program, my score was in the 92nd percentile. So that means essentially 92% of the test takers, their score was below my mark. So I can't remember what my score was specifically, but essentially to match and make yourself competitive, try and get the best score you could possibly get. But there's no official score. You just need to pass the exam. So the next question is from Adisha. I'm currently studying in a foreign medical university. So how is it possible for getting elective experience in Canada as an international medical student? So essentially, if you're still studying, if you're still a medical student in a foreign medical school, you, in order to get an elective, essentially apply to each of the specific universities. So have a look at, if you go on Google, I may be able to make a list up for you guys after this live stream and put it on the comment box. But essentially, go to Google and look up Canadian medical schools, and there should be somewhere there'll be a list of all the medical schools across Canada. And we don't have many medical schools. So for example, in Ontario, the province of Ontario, there's 5 medical schools. And then each of the other provinces, there's probably about 1 or 2. So in total, there may be about 12 to 15 medical schools across Canada. And what you want to do is just Google something like, say you want to do general surgery. Just Google general surgery elective University of Toronto, and there will 100% sure there's going to be a link there to the Department of General Surgery at the University of Toronto. And then there'll be information about electives and how you go about applying for electives. Usually there's a fee. There might be about a fee of $100 or $200 as an admin fee. But that's the best way to get a Canadian elective. And that's also the best way that you're going to enhance your application, because you're going to be able to get a good reference letter from a Canadian doctor. And a reference letter from a Canadian doctor is very, very important for your CARMS application, because that doctor is going to be able to compare you to all the other Canadian candidates that they've seen through electives, and then it just enhances your application. So very important, but best way is just do a quick Google search. So the next question, let's see here. So the next question is from Ali Mansour. What are the options that I could do after coming to Canada as an IMG while I'm doing the licensing? It really depends. So Ali, really depends. If you need to, most people need to support their family and have an income. So you could potentially just get a job in some other area. That's one of the things that many people do. But if that's not if not, the other option, if you don't want to waste too much time and you want to enhance your application, is maybe doing sort of a further like a graduate degree, sort of a master's in a specialty that you're interested in, that's what I would recommend, because at the end of the day, you may be able to get a publication and make some contacts um, uh, in the various universities. That's a good option. But most people end up just working because everyone needs to end up pay their bills as well. Um, so the next question is from Saunders. If somebody's working with Canadian anesthesiologists, could they write a good reference letter catering for family medicine? I think so. So, um, yeah, I think that's definitely possible. So, at the end of the day, when you're applying for residency, they're the main thing that your reference letter is going to talk about is, are you going to be able to fit into a Canadian residency program? So, are you a good team player? Are you approachable? Is your language skills up to par? Those are the biggest sort of factors that play. So, I believe an anesthesiologist could definitely give you a good reference letter if you want to be a family physician, because at the end of the day, being a physician in any specialty, there's always the basics are all the same as a physician. Everyone, whether you're a family doctor or an anesthesiologist or a pathologist, everyone still remembers their first and second year medical school sort of skills, right? So, how do you take a good history from a patient? How do you interact well with patients? How do you build sort of trust with your patients? How do you do, a basic physical examination, a cardiovascular exam, or a neurological exam? Whether you're in anesthesia or family medicine, everyone sort of remembers those skills. So I think a Canadian anesthesiologist would definitely be able to give you a good reference for family medicine or any other specialty. And if that's the only option you have, like ideally, if you want to do family medicine, try and get a reference letter from a family doctor. But again, there's so many factors, and you may not be able to get that. But if you're able to get a good reference from a Canadian anesthesiologist, then yeah, I think that would definitely be a good option as well. Saunders is asking again, could you share your email address? So I do have my email address publicly available. So on my YouTube channel, if you go to the About section, I have all my contact details on there, my email address, my Instagram, um, and a few other things. So if you have any specific questions, that's probably the best way to contact me, is through my email address. Again, you'll be able to see it on the About section of my YouTube channel. And my email address is dr.siva.mahalingam@gmail.com. So Sarah Singh says electives are canceled. Yeah. So again, just to address this, it's been a very difficult year and a half for IMGs and foreign medical graduates, just because of the pandemic. One is, all the hospitals in Canada are trying to limit the number of non-essential staff being inside the hospital. Um, and even in the operating room, we haven't had any elective students or fellows coming in, just because we're trying to limit the number of non-essential staff coming into the operating room. And it's primarily more due to safety. We don't want people who don't need to be inside the operating room being there for their own safety. So it has been a very difficult time for people to get elective experience, but hopefully that'll change now that the rates of COVID-19 are reducing slowly in Canada. So the next question is from Akia. I'm a medical graduate from India. Which is a better option, that doing a postgraduate in India and pursue my fellowship in Canada, or straight preparation for MCC QE1? Realistically, again, that's a very hard question. It's how competitive your application is for to get into a residency program here. So if if you want to look at the stats for people matching into a residency program in Canada, if you've been brought up in India, did all your high school, medical school in India, matching in Canada is possible, but very rare. And so you really have to think hard about it, whether you want to take that risk and come to Canada to try and pursue residency training. Because if you have a good option in India to do postgraduate training in a subspecialty, for example, say in anesthesia, that may be the better option, because then you do your training in India and then you may be able to come to Canada afterwards. Yeah, so that it's a very difficult question. So one of my colleagues at the University of Ottawa, he did all his training in India, and then came to Canada as a fellow, and he did a fellowship for 2 years, and then ended up writing the Royal College exams and passing them, and he's here. And so he's working as a consultant now. So it's a very personal choice. It's a very hard question. But you just have to keep in mind, matching into a CARMS residency spot is not a guarantee. And when you look at the past statistics, most of the people who match into a residency program into the IMG spots are people who have been raised and studied in Canada pretty much all their life, and then just went away for that 4 or 5 year period for medical school and are coming back. Yeah, so that's my answer about that. Next question is from Huma S. Oh, thanks very much for that comment, Huma. Next question from Miriam. I have a question. If I already have a master's in public health and recently had a thesis in clinical medicine, does this help the resume for practicing as a physician and apply for residency? Yeah, so Miriam, definitely that experience would enhance your CV, because again, you want to try and stand out from the crowd. So anything you have that's extra on your resume makes you stand out from the crowd of applications that most programs receive. So having a PhD or having some sort of postgraduate degree and having some research experience definitely puts you above the crowd, because getting a research publication is not easy. And so if you do have a research publication in a journal, it just makes you look like you've put in the hard work to get that publication. So it would be very impressive, and it would definitely enhance your application for residency. Sorry, Saunders. I'll go back to your question again. Actually, Saunders, I think I did address your question about Canadian anesthesiologists. If you could just write that question again. But yeah, so just to address, I did address the question about Canadian anesthesiologists would be a good reference if you wanted to do family medicine. And then my email address is available on my YouTube channel. It's listed on the About section. So the next question is from Navjot. How difficult is it to get into fellowship program in Canada after post-graduation from India? So it's actually not very difficult. We have a lot of fellows at the University of Toronto from the Middle East, from India, from Sri Lanka, doing fellowships in specialties such as anesthesia, radiology, all the surgical specialties. So it's not difficult at all. You just have to put in the application and do the interviews. So doing fellowships in Canada is much less competitive than getting into a CARMS program. So again, you just have to apply. So Saunders, could you please ask your question again? I may have missed it. If I did, I apologize for that. So the next question is from Tushant J. I was just wondering, are there QE1 or NAC cutoffs for each program, or is this not specifically listed? So technically, there's no official cutoff for any of the programs. So, well, at least from what I remember a couple of years ago, and when I applied, there was no official cutoff. So essentially, you just needed to pass the MCC QE1 and you need to pass the NAC OSCE. But informally, there are cutoffs. So when programs look at residency candidates as IMG candidates, the only objective measure is looking at the QE1 score. So my advice is, for if you're very serious about matching into a residency program, try and do as well as you can. So study really hard and take the examination very seriously for the QE1 exam, because you want to get the best score possible, because that score is going to just enhance your application and you'll stand out among the crowd. So you have to remember, for any program, for one spot, there might be 500 people applying for this one spot. Or for example, in anesthesia, when I applied 8 spots across the country, my program director said there was about 900 people applying for these 8 spots, right? So anything you can do to enhance or stand out above the crowd is important. So get the best score you can in the QE1. The next question is from Sarah Singh. I was told that the letter must be from the specialty you really want. Family medicine, that if you get from a specialist you want, but settle for lots of candidates are really branded for family medicine. Yeah, so ideally, so when you get a reference letter, ideally you want to get reference letters from the specialty that you're applying for. So if you're trying to do family medicine, you want to get reference letters from family doctors. So that's the number one thing. The next thing with reference letters is you want to get reference letters, at least one reference letter from a Canadian physician. So I would try and mix it. So if you're applying for Canadian training and Canadian residency in family medicine, I would try to get maybe 2 reference letters from family physicians. The last letter, if you can only get a reference letter from a general surgeon who is a Canadian doctor, I would include that as well, because that Canadian doctor is going to have a huge impact on your application. Those family doctors from India or some other country, yeah, they'd be good, but that Canadian doctor is going to add, even if you're applying for family medicine, even if that specialist is a general surgeon, but they're Canadian and practicing in Canada, it'll be a huge impact. So the next question is from Anjuta. Is it too late to start residency training in Canada at the age of around 38? So I don't think 38, I think, is probably a good age. I don't think it's too late. So residency training in Canada for specialists range from 5 to 6 years. So 5 years for most specialties. Neurosurgery and cardiac surgery is 6 years, but everything else is 5 years. So I don't think it's too late. So if you're starting at 38, you'll be 43 by the time you're done. And then most physicians in Canada usually work till about 65 or 70 years old. So you'll have a long sort of career ahead of you. So I don't think it's too late applying at the age of 38. And if you're applying for family medicine, it's 2 years. So you'll be 40 years old by the time you're done. The next question again is from Sarah. I'm an OBGYN with 290 and did not get a family medicine spot. They told me that they do not like to see OBGYN trying to pass as family medicine. So it's very difficult. Ideally, when you apply for training spots, you want to tailor your resume to try and make it look like that is the specialty you want. So, for example, um, when I applied for my anesthesiology training, my resume for anesthesia training was specific for anesthesia. My backup was also family medicine. So I had a lot of applications as a backup, but I tailored my application for family medicine specifically with a resume that looked like I was interested in family medicine. Um, so yeah, like I would tailor each of your applications to the specialty that you want to get into. But it's fair. If you look like all your experience is in OBGYN, then they may just prefer other candidates who look like their number one choice was family medicine. So it's a very difficult situation, and it's very hard because you do want to apply to as many positions as you can, but sometimes that's just how things go. Um, so other comments. So Saunders says, yeah, thanks, Saunders. So yeah, feel free to drop me a line. And so it's around 10 o'clock, just past 10 o'clock. So I'll keep going for another 30 minutes or so. I want to thank everyone who's joined me for these sessions. Um, it's I find it just a lot easier to be able to talk to the camera and address your questions directly, because I know I've been receiving a lot of emails and direct messages on Instagram about specific questions. And rather than answering these questions individually, I think just answering in a sort of a group platform is able to help a lot more people at the same time. Um, and I just enjoy sort of talking directly to you guys rather than having to type out emails. The other thing I wanted to just share just before people sign off, I'll still keep going for about 20 more minutes or so, or as long as you guys want me to. But this YouTube channel that I started it off during the pandemic back in earlier this year, back in January 2021. And it was more because at that time, um, because of the pandemic, the elective operating room cases were on a slowdown. So I had a lot more um, time to do other things rather than just work on clinical medicine. So I thought this was a good platform for me to just share my experiences about how I went about through medical school and coming back to Canada. And I didn't expect that the response would be this positive in terms of everyone reaching out for help and advice. And it's been a really good experience for me. The only thing I would like is if you guys are able to and you have a YouTube account, I would really appreciate if you could subscribe to my channel. So far in the past couple of months, the sort of videos that I've produced are more tailored towards applying to CARMS and getting through the MCC QE1 and the NAC-OSCE. But going forward, I want to continue this. Although my the work and my practice has become busy again, just because the pandemic is slowly finishing and elective surgeries are now back up to full speed. I want to continue this, but going forward, I may start doing some videos about interview skills, any other specific sort of videos about life as a doctor in Canada, just because I think it's very hard for people to appreciate what life in Canada is like and what the realistic sort of picture of working as a physician in Canada. So in the future, I want to sort of do videos about like a day in the life of a physician in Canada, and hopefully that'll give people a better idea of what it's like to work and live in Canada, and whether that's actually something that they want, because a lot of people may not really have a realistic idea of how it is to live and work in Canada. So hopefully that'll be useful for you guys. So if you do want to see more of those videos, I would really appreciate it if you'd hit the subscribe button on my channel, and it'll just reassure me that you guys want to see more of these videos. So I really appreciate you guys joining me. So we'll return back to some of the questions that you guys are sending through. So the next question was Yamini Sharma asked about any advice about scoring well on the QE1. So Yamini, I have a video on my YouTube channel called The Ultimate Guide to the MCC QE1. So I would recommend watching that video. There I sort of share some of the strategies I use to score well on the exam. So have a look through that video. And then if you have any more questions, you can always drop me a line on my email address. The next question is from Navjot. One last question. Which fellowship programs are easy to get and which are difficult ones? So in terms of fellowship programs, they're all a little bit easier than applying to a CARMS residency program, but you essentially want to apply for a fellowship program that you have experience in. So, for example, for some of the anesthesia fellowships, you have to have anesthesiology training in order to apply for the fellowship. I don't think there's anything that's specifically easier or harder. Fellowships are available across the country in all specialties, but if you want to do an anesthesia fellowship, you need to have anesthesiology training. You wouldn't be able to come from general surgery and apply to an anesthesia fellowship. Sarah, so just to answer your question, when I applied to my primary interest was anesthesia, and my goal was to become an anesthesiologist. So my resume was tailored towards anesthesiology. My publication, or my two publications, were in anesthesia. So it was tailored towards anesthesia. My backup was family medicine. So for me, I didn't really need to fall on my backup because I got into my primary anesthesia training, which was in anesthesiology. So the next question is from Pataraporn. He or she asked about how difficult is it to get into a fellowship in dermatology. So there's various fellowships in dermatology, so it's not difficult. You just need to put the application in. And I would say getting into a dermatology fellowship is easier, or relatively easier, than getting into a dermatology CARMS position. So the best way to go about it is I would just first look up all the universities in Canada. So just do a Google search for medical schools in Canada. You'll get a list. And then each of those universities will have a dermatology training program. So then from that, you could, for example, if you're at the University of Toronto, just Google dermatology fellowship, University of Toronto, and you'll get a link to the Department of Dermatology, and you can apply directly to that department for a fellowship. The next question is from Vibe. I did an undergrad program in molecular medicine here in Canada. Do you think it's going to be a bit easier to match through CARMS? It's very hard to say. Once you have your medical degree, then your undergraduate degree doesn't really have too much of an impact unless your undergraduate degree was able to get you a publication in a journal. So the biggest things, again, in CARMS is your QE1 score. You need to have a very good QE1 score. You need to have a couple of publications, because that's going to enhance your application and make you stand out above the crowd. And the third item would be good reference letters from electives. So those are the most important things for your CARMS application. The next question is from Anjuta. If now I've already finished dermatology residency training from Thailand and now I'm studying PhD, is it possible for me to be a dermatologist in Canada also? Or do I need to apply for residency? So what I would recommend would be to contact the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Canada. So you should be able to Google that website and find out about the eligibility to write the dermatology examinations if you're coming from training in Thailand. So some people I'm not sure about the training in Thailand, but you may be eligible to write the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons examination in dermatology. And if you pass that examination, then you may be able to work as a consultant in dermatology in Canada. But again, you have to be eligible to apply to write that exam. There's some countries that are eligible, some countries are not. So have a look. For example, one of my good friends, he did his primary or he did his specialist qualifications in Australia. He came to Canada, just wrote the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons exam in the specialty, and then he's working as a consultant. Next question is from Pratik. If I'm an IMG, if any IMG passes the Royal College of Physicians of Canada examination, can they obtain license to practice in Canada? Generally, yes, you should be able to apply for a license to practice as a consultant in Canada if you have uh, qualified or if you've passed the examinations in that specialty. But just to keep in mind, there are only certain countries that are eligible to write the Royal College examinations without doing a residency in Canada. So, for example, in Australia, one of my colleagues came in and did that. But the best way to do that is contact the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Canada and send them an email or look up their website to see exactly which countries are eligible or which training programs are eligible to write the exam. The next question is from The Vibe. I did an undergraduate program in molecular medicine in Canada. Do you think there's going to be a bit? Okay, I think I answered that one. So Kieran asked, what if we don't have PR? So in order to apply, Kieran, so in order to apply for CARMS or residency in Canada, you need to be a permanent resident or Canadian citizen. So that's there's no negotiation about that. So yeah, so you need to have PR or Canadian citizenship in order to apply for residency or primary training in Canada. In order to do a fellowship in Canada, like say if you've already had your training in India or some other country and you want to do a fellowship, then you don't need to be a PR. You can come here on a work visa and do your fellowship. And then by chance, if you want to write the qualification exams and do all that, you should be fine. You don't need a PR. The next question was from Tushant, and he was wondering whether volunteer experience would help with applications. I think it would. It does. It may potentially sort of enhance your application in the sense that it adds something extra. I don't know if it's powerful. If you have it, it's good. But I don't know if it'll enhance your application to the point where you're going to stand out above the crowd. I think the biggest thing is if you're able to volunteer somewhere, but then get something substantial. So if you're able to maybe get a reference letter from that volunteer experience where if you're volunteering at a hospital and a physician is able to write a clinical reference letter about you, that may be beneficial. Or if you're volunteering somewhere and you're able to lend your experience and get a publication that way, it may help. But strictly just volunteering at a clinic, I don't think is a huge impact, but it is something to add to your CV. Okay, guys. So thank you very much for your questions. I really appreciate you guys joining. We have about probably about 10 minutes left in the session. I don't want to drag this on for too long, but I'll try and answer a few more questions that come along. But again, just before we sign off and just before you guys sign off, thank you very much for joining me. And if you do have any further questions, please drop me a email on my email address, which is dr.siva.mahalingam@gmail.com. You'll be able to find it on my YouTube channel link on the About section. And also, again, just a reminder, if I would really appreciate it if you subscribe to my channel, and hopefully in the next couple of months, I'll be able to produce some more videos that would be able to keep you informed about the CARMS process, about any changes with the MCC exams, as well as my plan is to do more sort of day in the life videos about just life as a physician in Toronto, Canada. So a few more questions are coming in. The next one is from Karen. After the MCC QE1, we have to do a 12-month clinical postgraduate medical training. How to get admission in that, please? So Karen, I'm not sure about that question. So you essentially need to do, in order to apply for CARMS, you just need to write the MCC QE1, the NAC OSCE. You have to be a permanent resident or a citizen, and then you apply for CARMS. I don't think you need specifically 12 months clinical postgraduate medical training to apply to CARMS, but yeah, in Canada, the only way to get postgraduate medical training is to be in a CARMS, go through the CARMS match and get a residency program. There's no other way to get recognized clinical experience. So you wouldn't be able to do a 12-month internship without going through CARMS. The next question is from Anjuta. Is it regular to walk into an aesthetic clinic in Canada, or most of the people there went to the hospital for laser or Botox injection? I don't know specifically about aesthetics in Canada. Most sort of medical procedures have to be done by a qualified physician. So anything in aesthetics, you generally go to a plastic surgeon. Plastic surgeons in Canada work either in private practice, like in their own clinic, or they'll be based out of a hospital. But usually aesthetics are all privately funded cases that are done at plastic surgery clinics in Canada. So the next one is from Karine. I'm a Canadian IMG. Do observerships help on your resume? Yeah, so observerships definitely help. They're not as powerful as electives. So generally, if you are in medical school, I would do an elective to get a good reference letter, but observerships do enhance your resume in the sense that you're able to get a good reference letter from an observership. And if you're able to get a good reference letter from a Canadian physician, it'll enhance your resume and enhance your application to CARMS. So the next question is Muskan asking, do you know people who got their MBBS done in India and then moved to Canada? So I do know a few people who have their MBBS and live in Canada. I know one of my friends did their MBBS in Sri Lanka and then matched into radiation oncology in Canada. So it is possible. You just have to keep in mind that it's very competitive. So you have to make sure your resume stands out above the crowd. So the next question is from Jazz. Can an Indian specialist doctor do fellowships in Canada? Yes. So we have a lot of Indian specialists doing fellowships in various specialties in Canada. So the ones that I know directly are doing fellowships in anesthesia, radiology, transplant surgery. I remember just about a month ago, I was anesthetizing a patient who was an organ donor, and essentially the team that came from the University of Toronto downtown, pretty much all of them were transplant fellows from India coming to do the organ retrievals. So there's a lot of specialists from India doing fellowships in Canada. So it's possible. So the next question is from Karen. So MCC QE1, then I pass it after that MCC QE2, and then CARMS. Until then, I can get. Okay. So Karen, I would suggest. So just to get some information about the LMC or the MCC exams, I would go through to the Medical Council of Canada website just to read through that information. As you may or may not know, now the MCC QE2 examination has officially been canceled. So there's no longer a requirement to do the MCC QE2. Essentially, the only examinations you need to do are MCC QE1 and the NACOSCI. Okay, so MCC QE2, for everyone who doesn't know, has been officially canceled, and you don't have to write it now. And it's never coming back. So that's probably good news for most people. To get clinical experience, if you haven't gone through the CARMS process, I would say maybe volunteer at maybe a family medicine clinic. That's probably the best way to sort of keep your clinical skills or clinical experience up. But again, in Canada, if you're not a physician, so if you don't have a license to practice, so if you haven't gone through the CARMS process and are not a resident and you're not a fully qualified physician, by law, you're not allowed to do procedures on patients. You can observe, but you're not allowed to do procedures on patients if you're not a licensed physician. So the next question is from Muskan. Do letters of recommendation from university teachers help? No, I would say recommendation letters have to come from physicians who've observed or seen your practice in a clinical environment. Getting a reference letter from a university teacher would not help in your application. So the next question is, will we get paid a salary for specialty fellowship? Yeah. So if you're a fellow in Canada doing a specialty, you do get paid. The salary ranges from between 60,000 to 80,000, depending on the specialty and which university you're at. So you do get paid as a fellow in Canada. You also do get paid a salary when you do residency training in Canada. And the salary varies from, in your first year, it starts at 58,000 and it ranges up to about 80,000 Canadian dollars in your fifth year of training. Yeah. So Muskan is a second-year medical student, is in Kazakhstan. What things should you be doing? So the biggest thing I would do as a medical student, Muskan, is prepare to write your MCC QE1 and your NACOSCI and get a good score. And while you're in medical school, make sure you take every opportunity to try and get involved in any type of research opportunity so you can get published. And the third thing is, once you're eligible to do electives, if you're able to, try and travel to Canada to do an elective in a specialty so that you can get a Canadian reference letter. The next thing is from Tushant. If you have a job as a physician assistant or telemedicine assistant where you have patient contact, which is history, physical exams, and writing SOAP notes, is that good to show as Canadian experience? Yeah, I think that would be good. Yeah, I think that would be good experience. If you're able to get a reference letter from a supervising physician from that job as a physician assistant or a telemedicine assistant, that would be ideal. So use that job to get a good reference letter. That would be the most important thing I would tell you. Hermes says, do publications as co-authors still make a difference in CARMS applications, or just try to publish as main author? No. So essentially, a publication where you are the main author or a co-author, it doesn't matter. As long as your name and you are involved in that publication, that would enhance your application greatly. So it doesn't matter. Try and get your name on as many publications as you can, and that'll help your application. The next one is from Jazz. Um, when can an Indian anesthesiologist do fellowship in Canada? Will they get a stipend or salary? Will they get any license to practice in province like Ontario or in private hospitals? So essentially, if you want to do an anesthesiology fellowship in Canada, you basically have to have your full qualification as a specialist in India. And then when you come to Canada as a fellow, you do get paid. So you get paid between $60,000 and $80,000 per year. But it'll be a restricted license. You will not be eligible to work independently in a private clinic or hospital. Essentially, when you come to Canada as a fellow, you come as a trainee, and your license is a trainee license, and you'll be working under the supervision of a consultant. The only way you can work independently is if you write the Royal College examinations and get an independent medical license. The next question is a follow-up from Tushant. He's following up. His question is doing a physician assistant or telemedicine assistant job better than an actual elective rotation? I would say no. I would say doing an elective is probably better than doing a telemedicine rotation, because when you do an elective, you are allowed, you're in the hospital environment. Your supervisor is able to write a letter of reference based on you being an elective student. And so a lot of the people who apply to CARMS specialties, their reference letters are based on electives. And that's sort of the natural process. When you go through medical school, everyone in their third and fourth year does electives. And those electives are a time where you showcase all your skills as a medical student and how good you would be in a specific specialty. So if you're able to do an elective and get a reference letter, that's what I would recommend doing. It would in my opinion, it would look far better on your resume doing an elective and getting a recommendation letter that way. Especially for telemedicine, if you're maybe applying for family medicine, it may be okay. But if you're going to apply for a residency program in a subspecialty such as anesthesia or a surgical specialty, then doing an elective in that specialty would far outweigh doing a telemedicine job and getting a reference letter that way. The next question is from the Vibe. Do you need to pass QE1 and NAC before elective? No, you can do an elective at any time during medical school where you haven't passed the QE1 or NAC OSCE. So yeah, you could look for an elective at any point in time. The next question is from Harsh Spear. If someone is not a permanent resident, then how is he or she able to do residency? So unfortunately, that is probably the one downside about the training process in Canada, is you need to have permanent residency or citizenship in Canada. And so there's no way to go around that. Yeah, so I don't know how you would go about getting a permanent residency in Canada. The best way is to maybe contact an immigration agent and see if they have any advice. So the next question is from Jazz. Can you please explain the cost of doing fellowships for Indian anesthesiologists in Canada? Yeah, so essentially the process to get a fellowship is I would go to Google and Google up Anesthesia Fellowships Canada, and you should get a list of the various universities that have fellowships in anesthesia. The costs are very minimal. You'll have to pay for essentially the travel to come to Canada. You'll have to pay for your licensing, which is probably about $600-700. But then you get a salary. When you're a fellow in Canada, you'll get a salary. The next question is as a second year medical student, will you be able to do an elective in Canada? Yeah, so you will be able to do an elective. I would just Google up, uh, look for medical schools in Canada, get that list, and then depending on where you want to do the elective, look up, for example, elective in anesthesiology at the University of Toronto, and you'll be able to go to their website and apply for an elective. So electives in Canada, relatively easy. The only caveat is in the last 18 months, because of the pandemic, most electives have been closed off because uh, they're trying to limit the number of people in hospitals. Yeah, so okay, guys, so it's about 10:40, so I'll probably wrap it up. Again, I want to thank everyone for joining me on this live stream. It hopefully it was informative. I don't want to keep you guys too long, but if you have any other specific questions, please reach out to me on my email address, which is again listed on my YouTube about section. That's probably the best way. I'll try and get back to you as soon as I can. Keep in mind, I'm also working, so I have a pretty busy schedule, but I'll try and respond to any specific questions. And again, just a final word. If you haven't subscribed to my channel already, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribe. And hopefully, I'll be able to share some more information with you. And if you want to do another live stream, please send me a request, and then I'll try and organize another one in the next couple of months as I see if there's some interest. Anyway, thanks very much, guys. I hope you had a great weekend and hope to connect with you sometime. Okay, take care. Bye bye.